Joker is an iconic comic book villain, and his appearance in The Dark Knight was astounding. And one of the reasons why it's loved so much is because how he employs game theory throughout the entire movie. In this video, I want to walk through some of that game theory and help you understand it. In particular, we're going to look at the ferry scene. Now, a lot of people think that this is a prisoner's dilemma, but I'm going to give you 6 reasons why this is not a prisoner's dilemma and help you see what it really is. Even though the Joker and Batman are fictional characters, thinking through the game theory of what's going on here will help us develop our economic thinking, and it can actually help you make applications in the real world. So at the end, we're going to talk about what you should do if you think you're in a prisoner's dilemma. Hi, I'm Greg, and welcome to Market Power, where we look at the power of markets and economics to shape our world. And once you understand that power, you're going to understand choices and consequences and make meaningful change in your community and in your personal life. Whether you know it or not, game theory is something that you engage in regularly. Game theory, broadly speaking, is a branch of economics where we look at how people act when their outcomes depend on the actions of others. To understand the importance of game theory, let's look at just a simple example from the movie, and that's when Joker and Batman are playing chicken in the road. If Joker and Batman, who we would call players in this game, were maximizing their own utility, they would just get out of the way. Batman was weaving in and out of cars all the way on his way here. Joker stepped out of the way of the bus when he could have gotten hit. But in this chicken case, their utility doesn't depend just on what they do, it depends on what the other person does. The two of them are engaged in a game of chicken trying to show which one's the stronger player. And so if Joker steps out of the way, Batman understands he's stronger than Joker. Whereas if Batman swerves away, Joker understands that he's the stronger player. So individually, the best thing would just be to get out of the way like they have the rest of the movie. But in this game, the best thing is to go and hope that the other person moves out of the way. Which brings us to that last scene, the ferry scene, which is commonly seen as a prisoner's dilemma. And it makes sense why you would think that. First of all, there are prisoners on the ferry. It's a very heavy-handed way of Christopher Nolan saying, yeah, this is a prisoner's dilemma. So what is a prisoner's dilemma? Well, the classic way we formulate a prisoner's dilemma is we talk about two players, two criminals who have been caught, but the police don't have enough evidence to imprison them. If the two of them stay silent, then the police can only imprison them for 2 years for the minor thing they did. If both of them confess, then they can get 5 years. But if only one of them confesses, one of them will get off easy with just 1 year, and the other one will be given 6 years for not complying with the police. The prisoner's dilemma is so interesting because if we were in a situation where there was only one criminal, then obviously it's in my best interest to just stay silent. But now we've introduced this other criminal and his behavior influences my outcome and therefore it changes my action. Let's say that you and I are the criminals in this case. We've been caught and we're separated. We're in different rooms. The police comes in and offers me this deal. I'm thinking I should stay silent. But if I stay silent and you stay silent, I can cut off some of my jail time by confessing. So I actually get a better outcome by not sticking with our deal. And the same thing for you. If I stay silent and you confess, then you're gonna get less jail time. So if I break the deal, I might not be willing to trust you to keep your deal, because if I stay silent and you break the deal, then I get 6 years. Whereas if you do break the deal and then I break the deal and I confess, I'll only get 5. So it's actually better for me, and no matter what you do, for me to confess. So in a standard prisoner's dilemma, both of us confess and we both end up in prison for 5 years, even though if we had both stayed silent, we would have only gotten 2 years. And that's why people look at the ferry scene and think that it's a prisoner's dilemma, because obviously nobody would pull that trigger and blow up the other boat. But now I'm introducing that other boat as the opportunity to pull the trigger and blow me up, and so now I have to think about what they're going to do and how that affects my actions. Although this game looks a lot like a prisoner's dilemma, it's not. So let me give you the 6 reasons why it's not a prisoner's dilemma. Starting with, there's an additional player. Number 1 is the Joker is a player in this game. In the standard prisoner's dilemma, we have 2 players, and you have to make your decision based on what you think just that other player is going to do. But the Joker is an additional player here, and he could be messing with the rules, just like he's shown before. In fact, earlier in the movie, the Joker was playing a game with Batman by giving him the locations of Harvey and Rachel, but switching who was where. Batman didn't consider that the Joker was playing a game, and he just went on the information he was given, and that ended up resulting in Rachel's death. By the way, that game in game theory is called matching pennies. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's basically the same game they played in The Princess Bride. The second reason this is not a prisoner's dilemma is that the Joker has removed the socially beneficial outcome. The reason why the prisoner's dilemma is so interesting is that two people acting rationally have chosen an inferior outcome. If they had both stayed silent, they would both be better off. In this case, though, the Joker's removed that better outcome. If they both pull the trigger, they both blow up, and if neither of them pulled the trigger, they still blow up. There's no way to get to the better outcome. Number 3, there are a lot of people on these ferries and they have to find some way to aggregate these preferences. On one of the ferries, they start voting, trying to figure out what they should do. In the prisoner's dilemma, there's none of that going on. There's a very clear outcome on what's going to happen, and you don't have people worried about the preferences of the group. But even if we get rid of everybody on the ferry and there's only one decision maker on each ferry, this still is not a prisoner's dilemma because number 4, survivor's guilt could change the way that you think about the outcomes. For this to be a prisoner's dilemma, it has to be that being alive is strictly better than being dead, which in most cases we might say, but being alive, knowing that you pulled the trigger and blew somebody else up, that could change your quality of life. In fact, it's going to. If living with that guilt is worse than dying honorably, then you might not pull that trigger, and therefore it's not a prisoner's dilemma. The 5th one is similar to that last one. My outcome might depend on whether I think that other person would pull the trigger or not. If I think that person might kill me, then I might be willing to kill them. But if I think that they were never going to pull that trigger, and then I do, maybe I would feel really guilty for killing a virtuous person. This, of course, is why Christopher Nolan put prisoners in the other one, because you want them to think that these are people who are willing to kill you, and so you don't have as much of a moral qualm killing them. The 6th and final reason this is not a prisoner's dilemma is because I know what the other ferry is doing. In a prisoner's dilemma, you separate the players so that way they can't coordinate. You don't want them to know what the other one has done, so that way you get the most information possible. But in this case, you know whether the other ferry has pulled the trigger or not because you're still around. In fact, that's what they observe while they're trying to make a decision.
We're still here.
Which brings us to what you should really call this game. And that is, if you think it is a prisoner's dilemma, like you think it's still socially optimal for the Joker to pull the trigger and not for both of them to pull the trigger, that there's no survivor's guilt, that, everything is set that it could be a prisoner's dilemma, it's actually an iterated prisoner's dilemma. That means it's a repeated game. In a prisoner's dilemma, it's a one-time heist. You two are never going to work together again. And so if you rat out the other person, it doesn't damage anything about your future. In an iterated prisoner's dilemma, you work together. And so if you rat them out, that's going to forever damage your relationship.
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
In this game, the people know every minute whether the other person has pulled the trigger, and so as long as the other person hasn't pulled the trigger, I'm not going to pull the trigger either. When we understand it's an iterated prisoner's dilemma, it kind of ruins this ending because it's not as dramatic. The solution for an iterated prisoner's dilemma is for both of you to cooperate every time. There's a solution to the iterated prisoner's dilemma where you agree that both of you will stay silent unless the other one confesses, then you'll always confess. Or in this case, both of you will not pull the trigger until the other one pulls the trigger, in which case you'll both pull the trigger. In game theory, this strategy is called, now I'm not joking here, the grim trigger. And that makes it even more appropriate for what's going on in this. You have the heavy-handed prisoner's dilemma, and now you have the heavy-handed grim trigger. Which of course brings us to the application to your life, which is if you feel like you're in a prisoner's dilemma, you need to turn it into an iterated prisoner's dilemma. You need to turn it into a repeated game. You need to establish a relationship so that way you guys want to cooperate in the future. I have 2 videos for you to watch after this one, both of them dealing with the economics of fictional worlds. One is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and the other one is Avengers Endgame. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and we will see you next time.